All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started with a prayer. Then Barbara will make introductions to someone who is so well known and loved here that probably doesn't need much introductions, but we'll do that for those of you who may be newer or may not know our beloved speaker, Pat. And then we'll go from there. So let us pray. And this is a prayer for church musicians and artists out of the prayer book. And I just felt like that might be appropriate for our topic today. O God, whom saints and angels delight to worship in heaven, be ever present with your servants who seek through art and music to perfect the praises offered by your people on earth, and grant to them even now glimpses of your beauty, and make them worthy at length to behold it unveiled forevermore. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So with that, I'll turn it over to Barbara to introduce our speaker today.
Well, I am very pleased and honored to be able to introduce my good friend and colleague, Dr. Pat Lindquist, who, together with her late husband, Pastor Jack, was a beloved member of our St. Paul's Cathedral community. And she's been very instrumental in also initiating, creating, preserving, and helping to flourish the Women Together program. So I thank you for those efforts. In her other life, very extensive, she's been in private practice as a psychologist in San Diego for 42 years, specializing in anxiety and mood disorders. She trained in individual and marriage work at the Washington, D.C. School of Psychiatry, very esteemed school. And there she attended the Freud Center in London to focus on infant and young child development. She was a child and adolescent psychologist until she could no longer play on the floor, she humbly admits, necessary for treating kids, or be woken up at all hours, which is necessary for treating teens, many of you know. Now, during the COVID time, she works face-to-face in the office and online with people who want to do much to be woken up from the strain of quarantine. She says she's very proud, and we honor her for being receiving several Best Therapist awards, and more importantly, the opportunity to work with clients within several communities of faith. So I look forward to hearing her bring her considerable erudite and scholarly talents to bear on Marilynne Robinson. Pat.
Thanks, Barb. When I first framed what I thought I was going to talk about, we decided to call it Appreciating Marilynne Robinson. But I tell you, folks, there is so much to appreciate that it was too big a topic. So I have narrowed it down to just what I am going to do. So the new topic is called Marilynne Robinson, the faith within her fiction. And in just a moment, I'm going to have Father Jeff run a 2-minute interview with Marilynne Robinson so that you can get a whiff of her presence. She's talking about what is reality. And although this interview has been edited down to 2 minutes, I'm sure it was much longer than that, she is presenting what is one of her core themes, which is reality is to be challenged. What we don't know about the world, the cosmology, and even theology, what we don't know is where we have to go. And so we have to challenge categories. We have to challenge reality. The other thing I want you to notice is she's speaking for a group of young people at Regent's College in Vancouver. And they're looking rather serious and expectant when she comes on stage. And then I want you to notice how they look as she finishes her talk. And that look, that involvement, that engagement with her and her thoughts is exactly what happened to me as I was doing my research for this talk. So Father Jeff, go ahead and play the interview.
Okay, and you'll tell me when to stop, or am I stopping after the 2 minutes?
You're stopping at the end. It only goes for 2 minutes.
Okay, I hope I have the right one because I think this one is 1 hour and 26 minutes.
No, I can go ahead and talk. And if you can go on Google and Google interviews with Marilynne Robinson, it is the first one. It is only 2 minutes long. And I'll go ahead and talk. Can you do that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Friends, I'm Evan Rosa with the Yale Center.
Here's an example of Marilynne Robinson challenging reality. I'm quoting her. I don't like categories, she says. For example, whether something is religious or not religious. As soon as religion draws a line around itself, it becomes falsified. It seems to me that anything that is written compassionately and perceptively probably satisfies every definition of religious, whether a writer intends it or not. Did you find it?
Well, the problem is Google shows everybody's results in a different order, so I'll probably need a little more information.
Okay. All right. Here I go. When Marilynne Robinson published her very first novel, Homecoming, in 1980, she was unknown in the literary world. But a review that was written by Anatole Broyard in the New York Times ensured that the book would be noticed. As Briard said, it was, and this is a quote, "It is as if in writing it, she broke through the ordinary human condition with all of its dissatisfactions and achieved a kind of transfiguration." And her enthusiasm was shared by many readers and critics. In fact, she got the 1982 Pan Literary Award and the Penn Award for a debut writer. Marilynne Robinson has probably won more awards for her writing than almost anyone that I am aware of. I have 3 pages of awards that she has been given for her writing, including the Pulitzer for Gilead. Now, did you get it, Jeff?
I think so. Rethinking Reality. Does that sound
That's
right?
it.
Okay. You ready?
Yes, sir. Go.
Sorry about that. Here we go.
I think anyone who writes realizes that there's a vast difference between what you find yourself capable of saying and the impulse behind it that remains inaccessible even with great effort. We are not very successful at articulating what is deepest in us. We know intuitively and perceive vastly more than we succeed in articulating. It's a kind of stick figure representation of what reality actually is. And we take the poverty of our articulation as being what the world is. There is reality, you know. Reality is not taking a very pleasant turn these days. And a lot of it is a consequence of this sort of strange narrative we have about what things are and mean that we don't bother to look at. It's really very disturbing. There's something about my mind where I can't help turning something over and thinking, do I believe that or not? And if I don't, I generally have a reason, which I would like to propose. We need more voices. I don't like to see people recruited into one system of criticism. I think it's a pity that we educate so many people in too much the same way. I think that a great many things have to be rethought. And the great pressure on anyone is to say, I know what the conventions are, I don't believe them. If people thought about it, if they stopped deferring to what is conventional, would have new things to say. I feel great urgency about trying to reinstill in people a sense of their values. Many things now distract us from, discourage us from understanding. That makes us less ambitious in terms of the great capacities that all of us have. It makes us less respectful of one another. I figure that this whole thing only holds together by the grace of God, that there is no objective reason why it should even seem to hold together as well as it does. I suppose my hope is that God will continue to be unimaginably patient.
And that was a wonderful whiff of her. One Saturday afternoon when I was preparing this, I sat all day long and watched Marilynne Robinson interviews. And I swear that by the end of the day, I think I was changed. Her thinking, the force of her intellect, her treasuring and prizing of the human mind and how it works, just remarkable. She is as scholarly in pure science, cosmology, as she is in literature, philosophy, and theology. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about her as she began to become more known and cherished as a writer. She wrote Homecoming. It's considered one of the best novels of the decade, and perhaps more than that as well. It's considered a haunted novel, and it really exposes the experience of the outcast individual who doesn't quite fit in and who longs to fit in, but is frightened of the connection. And so the haunting is the longing and the melancholy and the sadness that goes with that experience. She did not write another novel for 20 years. And in the interval, she wrote a great deal of nonfiction. Her essays and book reviews appear in Harper's, New York Review of Books, and Christianity Today. In 1988, she published a collection of critical and theological writings called The Death of Adam. And these are essays on modern thought that feature reassessments of the importance of such figures as Charles Darwin, John Calvin, and Friedrich Nietzsche. She is quite an intellectual, but she has a way of connecting in her writing that puts you at ease about what you don't know, because that is her whole point. What we don't know is what we're trying to explore. Then in 2004 came Gilead, and it won the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Pulitzer Prize. In a few short years, Gilead was followed by Home, and then Lila, and just this November, Jack was published. In her nonfiction, as well as in her novels, especially with the new one, Jack, she passionately engages public policy as well as philosophy and theology. You should hear her criticism of Richard Dawkins in The New Atheist. She says, their arguments are not scientific as we know it. They are polemical, and they act as if science was a closed system. A little bit more about this later. Robinson is a Christian whose faith is not easily reduced to generalities about religious thinkers like Calvin, or even periods of religious thought like the Reformation. For example, she talks about Calvin as a misunderstood humanist, likening his essays and sermons to the celebration of the human. And she likens them to writers like, now think about this, to writers like Whitman, Emily Dickinson, Emerson, and Mark Twain, a celebration of the human. She breaks through the caricature of Calvin as a rigid, crusty dominator, portrayer of God as a judgmental force. And she reintroduces him as a very human and engaged writer about sola scriptura, the need to understand the Gospels, even if you don't understand them, to be able to trust them and to be able to engage yourself with them. And that was far away from the systematic theological thinking of the 16th century when he first came on the stage. Now, back to Marilynne Robinson. I would say that her novels really can be described herself as celebrations of the humans. The human. The characters in her novels are really indelible creatures. One of the things that happened to me sitting in my psychologist's office, listening to patients and reading Marilynne Robinson all last month, one of the things that happened to me was eye-opening. I was listening to an elderly lady telling me how sad and lonely she is. And she said, I have no purpose. I think God is calling me home. And I opened my eyes and looked at her. First of all, she had never mentioned the word God before. And secondly, she's much too young to be called home and healthy. And so I began to explore this with her. And I said to her, well, when you call your kids, she has 4 grown-up kids, when you call your kids, what do you feel when you talk to them about what they're doing, what the grandkids are doing, and what they're taking pleasure in? And she said, oh no, I couldn't call them. They're too busy. I don't want to bother them. Now, what brought me up short was that is Marilynne Robinson's theme in all of her novels. The longing to be connected, the disattachments that can occur, and the fear of rejection, the fear of not being welcome, the fear of being put out. I would say that over the past month or so, while I've been doing this research, my work has really changed. I've sort of quit thinking about diagnostic categories, how much depression and what kind of strategies. And I've sort of started looking and listening to people as if they had a soul. And that's what Marilynne Robinson says. Everybody has a soul. All you have to do is watch and observe, and you'll find it. Now, back to her indelible characters. Housekeeping is the story of Ruth and her sister Lucille, who are cared for by their eccentric Aunt Sylvie after their father just vanishes and their mother commits suicide. Marilynne Robinson dwells on how each of these characters is changed by each other. It's haunting. It's about cultural poverty, loss of historical connection with family, straining to make sense out of things, and trying to use somewhat outmoded conventions. For example, Sylvie decided somewhat out of the blue that the girls ought to go to church. And so she goes around town. She hasn't got any money. She goes around town and scrounges all kinds of clothes and puts together a costume for each of the girls. Hat, gloves, skirts, blouses, jackets, shoes, socks, and so on. So the girls walk into town and they go to the first church they find, and they sit in the back. And their eccentricity is felt. Nobody really even has to turn around and look. It's just felt. And of course, the girls can feel that. And they have no idea what they're supposed to do in church, or even much what church is about. And so as soon as possible, they get up and leave and run all the way home, take off all those clothes, put on overalls, go out to the woods, which they're accustomed to, and spend the night in a rowboat, listening to the sounds of the creatures in the forest. It's safer for them to be in the woods all night than it is to be in church. And that's an example for them of a convention which never was taught to them. And so they simply don't know how to use it and are more outcast than ever for Aunt Sylvie's efforts. Now I'm going to talk about Gilead. I'm going to guess that many of you have read Gilead. It was so popular. Gilead is even more of an exploration of personality. The book is given over to John Ames, a 77-year-old pastor who is writing up his life for his 6-year-old son to leave for after he dies. And he is telling his son about the wonder of his mother, Lila, walking into his life, and with whom he has a very unlikely romance. Lila is almost like one of the grown-up creatures from Housekeeping. She is scared, abused, and easily startled into running away. She was a throwaway child during the Depression, and she was rescued by Doll, who was another drifter like Aunt Sylvie. And they went on the road together, roaming the countryside, trying to survive. Lila becomes one of the most indelible characters of the whole oeuvre of writing. Lila became my favorite. And I wanted to do some reading out of Lila to you today, but I'm going to save that just in case I don't have time for the rest. Okay, that's Gilead, and then comes Home. Home is the story of the Boughton family and the grown-up children who try to care for their pastor father after their mother has died. Pastor John Ames is a Congregationalist, and Pastor Robert Boughton is a Presbyterian. And they have been friends all of their lives. And they have argued about Calvin and the spectrum of thought about Calvin's theology. They have argued about that all of their lives and went in somewhat different directions with their ministry. In the story of Home, the elder daughter, Glory, after some very big disappointments in life for herself, has come home to take care of their dying pastor father. And her prodigal brother, Jack, also comes home after 20 years absence. And Glory has to learn how deeply, deeply Pastor Boughton loves his prodigal son And this is a very difficult and painful experience for her, as she is the loyal daughter, the one who has given up her regular adult life to come home and care for father. And Jack is the one who comes and goes, and now has come to seek refuge from his father after being away so long. But he's ready to run in a moment's notice. Lila comes next. And Lila is really a prequel to Gilead. It's the story of Lila's life, her throwaway life, her sensitivity, her intelligence, her ability to survive, and how she and Doll make it during the Depression era, roaming the country. Most valuable thing about Gilead and Lila is how people talk. Robinson is so invested in how people talk. And she reminds us that when Wycliffe and when Martin Luther translated the Bible, each of them had been trained in Latinate language, Latinate expression, and each of them went out in the marketplace in order to stand around and listen to people talk, so they could put that into their translations, so people could understand the mind of God. And that is what Marilynne Robinson does with her characters. Find my place here. Oh, yes. When Lila and Doll are roaming around in the countryside, one of the things she learns just by listening is this advice: don't ever go into a church. All they want is your money. Well, Lila does step into a church during a rainstorm, and she meets Pastor John Ames, who relates to her somewhat incredulously, with fascination, and then love, and then devotion. Something she has only now and then, and mostly not so much, experienced. Now, the problem in the story of Lila is, as she comes into Pastor John Ames' life and becomes part of his ministry, but more importantly, part of his way of thinking, and especially thinking about God, she's totally tabula rasa. She has no background for this. And she too, somewhat like Jack, is ready to run at a moment's notice, abused, neglected, abandoned, and afraid. And she comes into John Ames' life, and the question becomes, can she change? I tell you, while I was doing this thinking, I did a lot of walking in Balboa Park. And I looked at the folks who are there, and especially the obviously homeless folks. And I thought through Marilynne Robinson's eyes, can these folks change? Can people change? If we match people with God's talk and God's thought and God's love, can people really change? She has all of her characters really struggle with doubt. And in doing this, she is really exemplifying Calvin, who struggled so much with his own doubt. And of course, Calvin was formulating his own theology at a time in history, the 16th century, that was rife with conflict. It wasn't just religious conflict, it was political conflict as well. But his doubt became part of the effort to comfort common people and to help them understand that their real, true freedom as peasants and as countrymen was in a relationship with God. The true freedom was there, and all it took was dutiful devotion and loyalty to God. Now, going rather fast through the books, but next comes Jack. As I told you, Jack is the son of Pastor Robert Boughton, and he is John Ames' godson. Now, this is a little more contemporary story about an unlikely and very star-crossed romance. Just as John Ames and Lila have a very unusual romance, Jack, who's been on the road away from home and away from his family for 20 years, is having an unlikely romance with Della. Now, this is in the 1950s, and they're living in St. Louis, Missouri, and interracial marriage is against the law, and Della is Black. And the way Marilynne Robinson puts it in the mouth of many people, she's a colored gal. So Jack has come home to find refuge with his father and with his family. Iowa always was a free state. And in the telling of Jack, Iowa is a free state, and he and Della can come to Iowa and live there as a married couple. And he needs his father's blessing to be able to return to Gilead. But as he is trying to tell his father about Della, and he too has a little son, he can't do it. He is too afraid. He is too afraid of what his father will think about his choice. So he stays in Missouri with Della. And Jack is a very unusual novel. It's probably Marilynne Robinson's most profound novel. She is presenting Jack as a ne'er-do-well character, a young man, and he's not so young now at this stage, a man who never can get his feet down, a man who all of his life was unable to take very much ordinary life, and he would spend a lot of time running away and a lot of time getting into trouble because he didn't seem to read social rules and social expectations. And so Jack reminded me of a lot of kids and a lot of families that I know who never quite makes it into adult life, who has a good heart, who's even attractive to people and even intelligent, but can't seem to read the social rules successfully enough. Now, to a psychologist, what's wrong with Jack is that he's born with an anxiety disorder, and he can't read social rules because he can't take much stimulation. And in his effort to control things and dealing with all of his errors and confusions, he over-controls and reads things the wrong way, and certainly does get rejected because people can't read him in return. And so Jack is a very knowable character. You would recognize him. Maybe some of you have even lived with a guy like him. And what she does in this novel is stack a lot of information. If you have a biblical background, theological background, it's just profound, because what she is doing is putting John Calvin's character into Jack in some respects. We know historically John Calvin was a very anxious individual, and that one of the things he did with his anxiety was to write about doubt and the seriousness of doubt and how essential it was to be dutiful to God, even if one doubted, because that was the only freedom, that was the only way to save one's soul and to make oneself safe. And so the thrilling part of Jack is how many layers of information that she puts into his story. Every time Jack opens his mouth, it's as if he has been able to talk a whole theological treatise. And this is not dense, it's not heavy going, it's real talk. But he's talking about the issues of freedom and devotion and loyalty to God and fear of the loss of being saved and fear of the loss of control over one's life. We know that John Calvin had two metaphors that he wrote about copiously. And one was that we are lost in an abyss and we have to find our way out. And the other one was that we're lost in a labyrinth and we can't find our way out without the love of God. And of course, Marilynne Robinson is helping us understand that that got very crusty and doctrinaire and became a sort of ferocious way of thinking about predestination. And what she's doing is refreshing this whole conflict about predestination. And she's helping us understand that that belongs, not only does that belong to a time in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, but it belongs to a continuum between fear of God on one end of the continuum and the knowledge that one has the mercy of God on the other end of the continuum. So Jack is quite a novel. I finished it once and I'm going to read it again, and I highly recommend it. Robinson says about her characters, and I'm quoting, "The characters that interest me are the ones that seem to pose questions in my own thinking. The minute you start thinking about someone and the whole circumstances of his life, to the extent that you can, he becomes a soul to you, mysterious, even spiritual." And then comes her question. If a person's experience of life is poverty, neglect, loss, and fear, can this person honestly change? Is this person lost in the labyrinth? Is this person encased in an abyss? One of the reviewers of Marilynne Robinson said to her, "Your characters are very sad. Religion doesn't seem to bring them happiness, but it does bring a great dimension to the lives of them if they have any truck with religion at all." And she says, there is great sadness in life. For example, at the inevitable end of great happiness, there's sadness, or in the frustration of profound life. Religion makes experience meaningful and sacred, or it expresses the fact that these things are true of experience, properly understood. Religion does indeed add another dimension to experience, unquote. And then that same reviewer said to her, "What do you get out of going to church?" And here's what she said. "I have gone to the same church for more than 20 years. It's my village, so to speak. I see children come into the world and elders pass out of it, and I see lives unfold around me. That's a little part of it. And then I have occasion, rare in the world, to hear a good and learned man," and knowing her, she would say woman too, a good and learned man say something he takes to be true, to a congregation listening in good faith for whatever truth he has to offer. And finally, she said, I think differently. I think differently in that place than almost anywhere else. It is if I can put the world and myself aside for an hour and hear and think more purely. You know, it is very unusual for a popular writer such as she, and a cherished writer, to use religion as her material. And another interviewer said to her, what's been the benefit of your faith and religious practice to your writing? And here's what she says. Religion is a framing mechanism. It's a language of orientation that presents itself as a series of questions. It talks about the arc of life and the quality of experience that's fruitful to think about. Religion has been profoundly effective in enlarging human imagination and expression. It's only very recently in time that you couldn't see how the high arts are intimately very connected to religion. And by the way, this is her going after Richard Dawkins and the New Atheists again. Her stories are very sad. And when asked more about this, she says, quote, I am compelled to write of the individual sorrow. Without some kind of testimonials, without a way of hearing people's voices, we forget them. And so we forget the labor required by generations to produce a neighborhood, a community, a way of talking. Without public accounting, there can be no grieving. And then she talks more about grieving. And here's where I think she really connected with me. And I think she really connected with an awful lot of folks that I talked to today, about our country, about our world, about ourselves in the present time. Grieving, she says, connects us in ways that are honest, real, forgiving. Grieving breaks us apart, indeed, and grieving brings us together. I write, she says, about the damaged heart of America. Now, I'm looking at the time, and we do need time to talk. So here's the bottom line. Marilynne Robinson says things can and will change. They have before, and they will again. Trust it, she says. If we are to know the significance of people, we must value what is in their minds, including the mystery, the majesty of religious language, values, and hope. And so I'm back to the lady who sits on my sofa and is much too young to die, and who says, I have no purpose. I think God is calling me home. Well, here's your homework. I want you to Google Marilynne Robinson interviews. And the next rainy day you get, you sit there and listen to this woman talk, the force of her intellect, the breadth of her intellect, and the solidness of her faith, and her ability to reinterpret Calvinism to us in a way that I think is very appealing. And I think you too, just as it happened for me, will be changed. Thank you.
Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you very much. I have a couple thoughts and questions, if I can lead off. can't help thinking how artists, and when they apply their faith to their work, like Tolkien and Lewis and the Inklings, and even in the book of Esther, they don't mention God at all, but it's just fused throughout their work. I mean, Tolkien's the role of, providence and the fellowship in helping to overcome, good overcoming evil, and protecting the life of the ordinary.
Yeah.
And like C.S. Lewis saying that I believe in Christianity like I believe in the sun, not because of I see it rise every morning, but because that's how I see everything else. And so this whole idea of using the faith in a non-structured way to influence people. And one comment I just also wanted, I know before I wish we had had a chance to talk with, and maybe we will outside the pandemic. You had expressed some, you liked, for example, Gilead, but you thought some of the philosophy was a little conservative. But I wondered if that has changed, and that if we look at the current events and some of the right-wing extremists now, aren't they looking for a sense of belonging and purpose? And that conservatism may be sort of the via media, the middle way, as Queen Elizabeth the first would say, of bringing them into the fold, sense of belonging and purpose.
Yeah, I think that's a very good comment, Barb, because it really is the spirit of Marilynne Robinson, which is we talk to people, and instead of thinking of them as ignorant, stupid, dangerous, we talk to people. And when we do that, if we do that sincerely, this is her religious faith, I am sure. If we do that sincerely, we will see their soul. And that can change both of us. That's pretty powerful thinking. And I want to make one more comment about that. In Jack, both Jack and Della have pastors as fathers. And her pastor lives in Memphis, and he is Black. And he has a Black congregation. There are no other kinds of people in his congregation. They are totally segregated. And when Della just introduces the thought that she's interested in a white fella, her father is just shocked. And he says to her, honey, white people don't nose it, but white people are dangerous. And we can't do that. We can't do that. Now, that's very powerful because it's about how we seal ourselves off in order to be safe and how we make ourselves dangerous by sealing ourselves off. Now, that's me talking, but that's Marilynne Robinson talking. Yeah. And Barb, as far as your other comment about writers who introduce us to the spiritual, if not, systematic faith, that is so true. I have a definition of the soul. The definition of the soul is the spiritual or immaterial part of a human being or animal that's regarded as immortal. So what that really means that some writers touch us there. They touch us in that place. They arouse that place, that truly individual, soulful part of us. So of course they do. Of course they do. More comments?
Thank you. That's very insightful.
I really liked that phrase when you said God is unimaginably patient, because it sent me thinking about the arc of history bending towards justice and how it feels like it takes so very, very long. And now I kind of have a new way to think about it as unimaginable patience.
Hi, Cindy. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Actually, it was Marilynne Robinson who said that during the interview.
Okay, yeah.
She's talking about how we have to challenge reality. And when categories are all sealed up, and it's so hard for us to talk across the seal up part, it's where we need to be. Again, it's about talking to each other. And she's saying, I certainly hope God has patience.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but think she's talking about right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is Sherry.
Oh, hi.
I'm in the part about, when you talk with someone long enough, you see their soul or you experience their soul. I'm reminded that the same thing is true in the presence of individuals with really significant disabilities, including those who cannot talk. That in their presence and attending to whatever form of communication they might have, in their presence long enough, you get to experience their soul. You get to find out that inside that unworkable body is a whole, living, thriving, spiritual being. Any comments?
Well, first of all, I know you, and I know something about your personal life, especially with deafness. And I know that professionally, you have devoted your life to the advocacy of the deaf and hard of hearing. And so I think all by yourself, you are a model, you illumine that thing called talk to people. There's a soul in there. And I think all of us who work in mental health have got to learn that early in the game, or we don't last very long in our profession. We have got to learn that whatever the hell's going on in there, there's a soul in there somewhere, and that we have to find it in order to create our part of the attachment in the relationship. So I think what you're saying is very, very important.
Hi, this is Anne. I loved your response to Sherry. I've admired Sherry for years, but just now, in a few seconds, she gave me a new glimpse of herself, of everybody.
Well, Anne, if I'm not, am I cutting you off?
No.
Okay. You see, that's Marilynne Robinson again. She taught at the Iowa Writers Workshop for many years. That's how she finished off her career. And she refused to let her young writers write in categories, start off by building up some facts about a person and then assume we understood what the character was. She said, you can't do that. You have to watch people. You have to observe. You have to let yourself steep as you listen, as you connect with people. And I thought that was profound in the sense that that is truly fresh writing. That's exactly what she's doing with the early reformers, and in particular with John Calvin. She's helping us reinterpret what that man was like in his personality and what he was dealing with in the world and what he was so frightened of himself and what he feared that was going to happen to people if they didn't create an immense devotion and loyalty to God. And that's how the concept of predestination got evolved. And so she is able to say, look, what's in the human mind? And that includes the human talk, especially if we're mental health workers, and especially if we're in ministry. That's really where we need to be working. Empathy is our greatest tool. And that's what was so important for me in this research. She really touched that part in me that I want to be in there and I have to be able to use if I'm going to be effective.
There was also the idea of always trying to explore questions at a deeper level, you know, that she always did that. And that in a writing workshop I was in once, the presenter was talking about how you write, you have to write with questions that you don't know the answer to. So you don't get to have a little story where you know exactly where it's going to end up, because then you're not on an exploration, you know. and that kind of, it really felt like what she was saying was coming together with that also, and how she writes.
Yes. Have you read a number of her novels?
No, I haven't. So, but I've been writing down titles. I'm going to go look.
Get going, girl.
Okay.
But watch the interviews first.
Okay.
That'll do it for you.
Okay.
Well, I think we're getting close to the end of our time. I just want to say thank you so much to Pat, and it was really wonderful to see you, see so many people renewing their connection to you as we went through this time together as well. And I know I so appreciated having you here. Thank you so much for being here.
And I want the last word. I want to say thank you to Barbara again for inviting me. Thank you, Jeff, for being my wingman on this technical stuff. I always thank Dean Penny for her hospitality, and for all of you who came. Thank you so much.